Hi. Stacy asked me to spend a little bit of time talking with you guys as the children's church teachers about kids worship. That was my world and my work for a few years before my kids were born, and I am thankful for a chance to be stepping back into it with you. So, I'm going to start with good news. And the good news is that Riverside is already a church that sings beautifully, and worship is already a valued and celebrated discipline in our church. So that means that it's really not all up to you to make or break their formative worship experience on a Sunday morning when you lead once a month. That's just not true. These kids already have a leg up, just like kids who are raised in homes that value literacy and healthy habits have that modeled for them, and they're more likely to choose that and develop that in their own lives. Our children have seen this done well for years already, and we're hoping to just build on a really, really beautiful baseline of knowledge. The other good news is that because you are someone who worships, and you are somebody who walks with the Lord and loves the Lord and is submitted to the Lord, you are well equipped to be a lead worshiper. That doesn't mean that you have to feel great about your singing voice, that you would feel comfortable as a worship leader, or that modeling movement for kids feels second nature to you. It just means that you have an overflow from your walk with the Lord that can be demonstrated. And we're going to try to do some of that in a way that is accessible for our kids, to add some skills to their vocabulary and to feel comfortable in a developmentally appropriate environment. So, speaking of the developmentally appropriate environment, why do we worship differently with kids? Why are there emotions? Do they have to be a literal interpretation of the song? Is this just so they can wiggle? What's the deal? So let's talk through that a little bit. Our kids are in different developmental stages, spiritually, physically, emotionally, with their memories. Some of them learn very differently than adults do, sitting in a pew or standing next to a pew. And so we just want to provide opportunity for them to have a tactile experience that may be helpful, to have something that may help connect their brain to truth in a different way. We want to enforce those connections in as many ways as possible. It's fun. Kids are more engaged when they're having fun. And it can get their physiology working for them. So if you'll indulge me for a second, my music education brain is going to take you down a little bit of a rabbit trail. But what I am aiming to do with that is to give you a little bit of an understanding of how good singing works and why we're choosing to move our bodies in the way that we are, mostly just so that we can get out of our own way and enjoy the time with the Lord, enjoy the kids, and just have a lot more self-forgetfulness once these things are built in, so that we can clue into what's going on with the people that we're leading and be aware of what's happening in the room. So, some basics of vocal pedagogy and music learning and movement. All music happens with a pulse and a beat. And to learn pretty much anything, you need context. So we'll do a lot of big body movements, and that will allow our kids essentially to create a spectrum within which to feel that beat. So if you're moving like this and you're hearing a pulse that is interrupting that fluid motion, that gives kids context. The point of that is basically to have less of their brain working on figuring out the lyrics and figuring out how the words interrupt the music. And when less of their brain power is going towards figuring it out, and they're feeling some of it instead of having to think so hard, they'll be able to use their brain for the lyrics and absorbing the theology and the truth that they are hearing in these songs and thinking about how that connects to their heart. So I hope that makes sense. Any of this that is confusing or just too much, or that you would love to chat about more. I honestly had forgotten how deeply passionate I am about this, and so I would love to chat with you, and probably learn a lot from you too as we continue to develop our worship environment for our kids at Riverside. So, continuing with motion, healthy singing happens on the breath, not in the throat. The breath is what moves any sound that is happening. It's basically just carrying the frequencies. What makes your voice sound like you is the way that those frequencies are resonating in the sinus cavities in your face and in your chest, which is why you sound differently if you have a cold or if you've injured your vocal cords in any way. The frequencies are happening differently, they're being carried different, and they're not resonating in the same way. The point of you knowing that is to know that if you feel nervous or if you need to correct one thing, the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for the kids that are watching you is to take a nice deep breath. That's going to allow your body to work the way that it is supposed to. So again, taking a nice deep breath gets you out of the way so we can get to the important stuff. It matters that we set the kids up for healthy singing so that their bodies will be safe. We don't want to cause vocal injury by asking them to sing in an unhealthy way. But it also removes discomfort, like unnecessary tension or false limits or discomfort with the vocal range. And we want to remove that discomfort and those limits so that we haven't made our bodies a distraction from worship. Again, I'm really hopeful that this makes sense. So we're going to aim for movement that engages the singing breath and helps their bodies work for them as they learn the skills of worship. We're just trying to get out of our own way. There is a lot to be said for excellence, but we aren't going to be using Sunday mornings to teach music education skills and specific vocal skills any more than we would expect James to be using the pulpit to teach literacy skills. It's meant as a support, but Sunday mornings is not, you're not responsible for that. No pressure. Music learning parallels language learning. And so, if you think about the way that small kids, like infants, begin to learn language, we have a huge listening vocabulary. Everything that they hear around them is what they are processing in some way. And so we want to make that as varied as possible. From your listening vocabulary, you start to approximate and to imitate. So that would be us just kind of trying to catch on to a song that we're hearing the first time, or kids trying to catch on to movements that we're seeing the first time. So that's an imitation vocabulary. You then have a speaking vocabulary. And so that is when you're taking concepts that you have absorbed and you're starting to arrange them. So you're using like common phrases or common words that have become part of your vocabulary, and you're using them to communicate. And then from there, we have a creative vocabulary. So if a kid has gone all the way from a listening vocabulary to a creative vocabulary, they may be saying, well, I know what this song sounds like, and here is scripture that I could put to this music that hasn't already been put there, or something along those lines. And so we will see kids in the room already just because of the music exposure that they've had before and the exposure to truth and how it is settling in their souls already. We'll see kids all over this spectrum. It would thrill my heart to see kids start to take leadership in leading kids in music and song and in worship and in emotions on Sunday mornings. And I think we'll get there a lot faster than we all think. So with all of that said, how do you prepare yourself to lead kids in worship? We already said it's an overflow of your relationship with the Lord. So you study and prepare and confess and repent just as you would for leading your lesson. It's the same you up there. You're just doing something a little different first that might feel a little more foreign than the teaching that you signed up for. It can feel really awkward to lead with movement until you get used to it. So self-forgetfulness is your friend. Do what you can do to make these songs and motions part of your physical vocabulary, to make them feel comfortable to you, so you're not learning and processing with an audience. If a group are watching you visibly wrestle with your words as you spoke to them, like you've seen me do in this video, it would be a little bit distracting. And so basically just come as comfortable as you can, knowing that it doesn't have to be perfect. Go with it. The motions have been intentionally created. We're trying to get their physiology to work for them. We're trying to help with some memory cues, but they aren't the point. They're meant to serve us as we serve the kids and as their memory serve them and as their brain serves them. The motions are not the point. Don't let them hang you up. Freestyle if you need to. If you need to stop and come up with something different with the kids and you feel comfortable with the decision-making process with them in the room, change it. Do what we need to do to make it actually work for us, and just keep moving. Because again, we want to kind of give kids the opportunity to put the music in context in their bodies so that the music is not in the way of the truth. How are we choosing our music? We're forming the theology for the kids. We're trying to find things that are developmentally appropriate for them. There's a range that is specific to each age that should be developmental. So Stacy and I are talking through all that stuff as we start to pick music for the kids and as we continue to pick it going forward. We are trying to align the hearts of our kids with the corporate body of Riverside. So our hope is to unify our youngest believers with the worship that's happening in the sanctuary so that if they were up there, they would feel comfortable joining in. It wouldn't all feel foreign to them. And we want to have a common vocabulary of songs and of truth. But it won't be exactly the same because not every fabulous worship song is the best teaching tool or the best physical tool or the most developmentally appropriate thing for what their bodies should be asked to do right now. How do we build a culture of worship for our kids? Now and probably always, it will be very basic. The most important thing to do is to give them Jesus. Keep teaching them about him and pray that their souls would respond. Give them a chance to be successful with developmentally appropriate repertoire, and we want to get their bodies working for them, which also means if there's a motion that is continually causing disruption or trouble, let's change it. It's not worth it. Model the joy and submission of worshiping. Worship in your private life, worship in your public life, and do whatever you can to be sure that song is not just relegated to Sunday mornings. You would never stand up and lead a prayer meeting or begin a sermon on a text that you had not read and studied. You wouldn't begin praying corporately if you never ever prayed privately. So if worship becomes more, worship through song becomes more central and more core and more familiar and more of a natural part of your own vocabulary, it will be a more natural thing to lead the kids in. I think when you hear the kids singing, it will stick with you more than these songs ever have before. At least that has been my experience always. I'm really excited to see what we see happening upstairs when we set them up for success. So I'm going to stop this video now, and the next video is going to have some crowd control tips and tricks, and so use those as you may.